story of Theresa v Boris, How May Became PM, Sunday at 9 on BBC Two.
Monday's Newsnight now on BBC Two with Evan Davis.
There was some careful manoeuvring in Downing Street today. Some mental pacing around, working out of who's on top. Quiet words to say, maybe you can stay, but something will have to change. And we're not just talking about the cats. Yes, after the Tories fall to earth, everything is up in the air. What of their manifesto and their Brexit will remain, and what will leave as hung Parliament politics bites?
Some MPs hoping for a benign Brexit are pinning their hopes on an unlikely alliance at Westminster. Others, of course, say the referendum was definitive.
In no way does this election mean an opportunity to somehow go behind that referendum result and somehow turn the tables on the British people.
Is it soft or hard or something in between? We'll hear from a prominent Brexiteer and Remainer. And eat your heart out, Theresa May. France's President Macron has a new party and it seems to be dominating French politics at the expense of the socialists. What are the lessons for us and the implications for Europe? And Katie Razzle has gone back to the very start of Theresa May's campaign to find out just what went wrong for the Prime Minister there.
Do you feel that you were very instrumental in what's happened in this election?
Definitely. I feel like we've caused it because we've gone from having such a small turnout amongst 18 to 24-year-olds to having a massive one.
Hello. For better or worse, hung parliaments offer an excuse to parties to jettison the difficult promises made in their manifesto. We saw that in the Tory-Lib Dem coalition of 2010. We're seeing the Tories prune away bits of their manifesto now as they negotiate with the DUP. But the really big question hanging over Westminster is whether our hung parliament means the Tories will change their much-talked-about plan for Brexit. It was set out in a speech in January, in a white paper in February, and in a letter to the EU in March, and it was uncompromising. But that was then, and now is now. The vision was not much debated in the election, but it's hard to say it got an uproarious thumbs up from the voters. And most MPs want a more flexible Brexit, including possibly the DUP. Well, our political editor Nick Watt is here. Important political day, Nick, as everybody gets over the election result. Just take us through the developments of the day.
Well, the Prime Minister convened a meeting of the political cabinet today ahead of a meeting of the government cabinet tomorrow. And then she pressed ahead this evening with her ministerial reshuffle. That's at the level below cabinet, and really kept with the same spirit of those cabinet appointments, which is mainly confirming the same people in the same places. And when there is a vacancy, achieving a balance between Remainers and Leavers. But the big event of the day was the Prime Minister's appearance before the 1922 committee of MPs, where she recovered some, but by no means all, of her authority by apologising for the electoral setback and then saying the following: "I got us into this mess, I'm going to get us out of it." And I do have to say that did go down well.
Right. Now, so she seems to have had a good day, stabilised things a bit. To what extent is the support she's getting? To what extent is that just because everybody's very tired and they just want to sort of get on with things? And how really durable is it, do you think?
Well, at the risk of sounding like an old veteran, I do have to say I can spot fake support by politicians. And I was outside the committee meeting today when the Prime Minister came out and then the MPs came out, and MPs genuinely thought she'd done a good job by showing contrition and then pledging to govern in a more open way. And interestingly, one minister told me that the Prime Minister had been impressive and funny, but then this minister said, why didn't we see that side of her during the election? So look, the Prime Minister has bought herself time to start the Brexit negotiations and possibly to see them through. But every Tory I spoke to will not budge on this fundamental point. Theresa May cannot lead the Conservative Party into the next general election. But the big question really, as you were saying, is where does this all leave Brexit? Here's what I found out today. A few short weeks ago, a hard Brexit seemed to be on the cards. Now the voters have had their say, and yes, a soft Brexit is hoving into view. Under Theresa May's original Brexit plan, there would be no halfway house. The UK will abandon membership of the single market and most of the customs union. If Brussels tables unreasonable demands, then the UK would also be prepared to walk away without a deal. Downing Street insists there is no change to its plan. But the Prime Minister now has to take account of 3 new factors. A contingent of 13 Scottish MPs, whose leader Ruth Davidson is calling for an open Brexit. The Tories' DUP partners, who want a customs arrangement with the EU to guarantee a frictionless border in Ireland. And a rejuvenated Labour Party, which is now talking about remaining in a reformed single market and customs union. Ruth Davidson told the Prime Minister that the government must push for what she called an open Brexit.
I'm suggesting that the Conservative Party works with those, both within the House of Commons and indeed with people without, to ensure that we have, as we leave the EU, we have a Brexit that works for the economy and puts that first. And I think that there was a real sense around the Cabinet table today that, as you would expect from centre-right politicians, that that is the primacy that we're looking for.
And the leader of the Scottish Tories also believes the party should be reaching out across the spectrum on Brexit. Labour agrees and now appears ready to water down the suggestion that the UK would have to leave the single market.
What we want is something that works for Britain, works for our businesses and for our communities. That means, as we've said, the benefits of the single market and the benefits of the customs union. That is low or no tariffs, it's no customs barriers, and an alignment of our regulations. Now, how that's achieved is part of the negotiation. But our criticism of the government is that it's taken all the options off the table. Now, unreformed membership of the single market without any change at all is not compatible with leaving the EU. But there's a discussion to be had with the EU.
The DUP leader, Arlene Foster, is due to meet the Prime Minister in London tomorrow with the aim of finalising an agreement to sustain the Tories in office. Newsnight understands from a senior Tory figure that a number of cabinet ministers are saying in private that the DUP, which is to the right on social issues, may provide them with cover to push for a softer Brexit. This Tory told me some ministers who've been wary of talking out on Brexit believe the DUP will give them a chance to slip through something more palatable to them.
The DUP takes a pragmatic approach that trade trumps all in terms of its dealings with the Irish Republic. So they want, unfettered trade, they don't want tariffs on goods going across the border, and they don't want a hard border. The DUP position is very helpful to the Conservatives in terms of managing Brexit. I think previously what the position was that the British government was going to work with the Irish government in managing a soft Brexit. Now the British government has got the DUP on board in terms of managing a softer Brexit.
DUP sources told Newsnight they have no quibble with the Prime Minister's original Brexit plan, and leading Tory Brexit figures are confident their vision is safe.
We've got 85% of the electorate voting for Brexit-supporting parties. For me, that is a vote of confidence in the direction of travel that Theresa May is taking us in when it comes to Brexit. And I think that we need to honour that. And in no way does this election mean an opportunity to somehow go behind that referendum result and somehow turn the tables on the British people, because that would be completely wrong.
Britain's political landscape has been transformed by the surprise result of the snap general election. Pro-Europeans are hoping that a hard Brexit will be the first victim, but Leave campaigners believe they still retain trump cards.
Nick Watt, well, there is, implied by his piece, a live and lively debate going on inside the Tory parliamentary party, but it's not one that they're too keen to do on live television, but we can discuss that debate with the Tory MEP, Daniel Hannan, a Brexiteer, and Neil Carmichael, a leading proponent of a softer Brexit, and Tory MP for Stroud until he lost his seat on Friday. I'm going to start, if I may, with Daniel Hannan. I just want to examine Daniel's views at the moment. And Mr. Hannan, a lot of people are looking for compromises and a slightly softer Brexit. I just want to ask, would it be acceptable to you if, as part of this, we decided to leave the single market but stay in the customs union, so there didn't have to be a border between the north and south of Ireland, and car companies could trade their parts backwards and forwards across the border?
I think that would be a very bizarre way of interpreting an open Brexit. Open Brexit, by all means maximising our trade links with the rest of the EU, but it also means being able to trade with the rest of the world. Now, even the EFTA countries, Norway and Switzerland and so on, they do it the other way around. They have partial membership of the single market, or in the case of the EEA countries, complete membership of it, but they are outside the customs union. And so they are able to sign free trade agreements with China, Japan, and so on, the economies that are really growing. If we're looking to the long term, that's where we need to be.
Right. Well, a lot of people have ruled out being in the single market, so the second best for some of those people is being in the customs union. Is that something you could swallow if that's what... I can see you don't think it's a good idea, you'd rather it wasn't, but could you even swallow that as an idea?
But, I mean, to be honest, I think some of those people are just sort of grabbing totemically at things. Look, the referendum was fought by a lot of people who were fairly close to the middle. I've never really bought this idea that the whole country is divided down the middle. Look, Leavers and Remainers are patriots who want the best outcome. And I think we agree, whether we voted Leave or Remain, that we want now to have the closest friendship with our European allies. We want to have military alliance with them. We want to have commercial ties with them. We want to keep the bits of the current deal that are working, and that may include some of the existing EU programmes. I don't think anyone's against that in principle. Okay. But we want to do it on the basis of getting the best possible deal for us.
No, but everybody agrees that this phrase...
partly that means...
Getting the best possible deal, everybody agrees with that, and we'd all like all the benefits and none of the costs. But look, I'm taking it that you wouldn't buy the customs union. Is there any flexibility in your mind about the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, the ECJ? Because it may be helpful in the negotiation to say, look, the ECJ, this European court, can govern our aviation agreements, or, for example, could govern the trade in nuclear materials. Is that something that you could tolerate or accept at all?
But the EU doesn't do that with any other non-EU member state. As I say,
could you tolerate it if we could persuade them?
Countries,
Could you tolerate it if
why
why
would we go in wanting a worse deal than Switzerland and Norway and Serbia and every other European country? That would be a bizarre position. We want. Look, I mean, the way you can get around that issue and make it work to the advantage of both sides is to do what the Swiss have done, which is to say, you'll have your court and we'll have ours, but where there is a plain interest in having the same policy or a harmonised outcome, we'll simply do that through a bilateral treaty. So we won't be inviting foreign jurisdiction, but the outcome will be the same. The Swiss have replicated, I would say, 85 to 90% of the contents of the single market, including the real biggie, which is the prohibition on discrimination against goods or services on grounds of origin, but they do it through bilateral treaties and domestic legislation.
Right. So you're sort of veering towards the Swiss option, but by and large, you're not sounding very compromising. Do you think Theresa May, with no parliamentary majority, should, for example, reach out to the other political parties, reach out to Labour and even the Liberal Democrats and say, look, let's see if we can foster a Brexit that suits 85% of the voters of this country, because we got 85% of the voters in the election? Do you think she should do that, or do you think she should only do that if they agree to do it all on her terms?
No, I do think we should be reaching out. I've said ever since the vote, it was a 48-52 vote. That is not a mandate for severing all your links. That is a mandate for a phased, gradual repatriation of power. We'll end up with a deal that is almost by definition going to go too far for some people and not far enough for others. But we should aim to get a deal that all sides can at least live with. And I think that will mean keeping a lot of the current links that we have with the EU where those are working. But, you know, even what people have been calling the soft Brexit option, which is the EFTA type option, even that leaves us with our farms back, with our fisheries back, with our international trade, our citizenship, defence, foreign policy. Even, I think we can do better than that, but even that is clearly becoming sovereign and having our own jurisdiction. Nobody is seriously suggesting that we should have ECJ rulings still telling us what to do when we've left.
OK, thank you for that. Neil Carmichael, let me talk to you. Just out of interest, which is your favoured option at this point? How would you like Theresa May's Brexit to change?
Well, first of all, we voted to leave the European Union, so what I'm about to say does not question that. But I do think we need to be much more realistic about the way in which we go forward, and going towards a softer Brexit is clearly an objective of mine and many, because we need to have proper trade relationships and we need to have those...
Do you accept that free movement of people has to go? Because many people have said that is just the starting assumption for all of this, is that has to go. Do you buy that?
Well, if you take the university sector, for example, that wouldn't be helpful for international students or indeed existing members of staff who were from the European Union who are now in our country. So that's the sort of thing we have to sort of have a proper nuance.
Free movement's a bit like pregnancy, you have it or you don't. I mean, do you believe in free movement or do you accept it has to go?
Well, I accept that the country has voted against free movement, and what we do need to do...
So the Norway option is out, basically, isn't it? Because the Norway option has free movement.
It has free movement, but I don't think that we need to sort of rule out the Norway option just because of that reason. I think there are other things we can consider.
Are you hoping that the EU will offer us some other concession on free movement that might allow us something very close to the Norway option?
Yeah, I think that's the direction of travel we should be going in, because I'm hearing from business increasingly that that's
the Europeans have given you no basis for thinking that at all, though, have they? Because the only thing they've ever said is, if you want to be in the single market, you have to have free movement. And people like, people have been saying in the last few days, maybe they'll give us an emergency break and the Norway option. But you would love that, I think.
I would, but your clip talking about the DUP just before really raised the issue about the border and how the attitude of the DUP might be different to the Brexiteers.
Can I ask this? Do you think, if you'd been in Parliament, and there are a few like you in the Conservative Party and some who are not as extreme as you, or not pro-EU as you...
I'm not usually describing
but enthusiastic about the EU. Would you use parliamentary muscle, because basically you'd always have a balance of power, would you use parliamentary muscle to humiliate your own government in order to soften the Brexit?
I think what we need to be doing is really what you also asked Dan, is reaching out to other political parties and reaching out to other stakeholders, because we've got to understand that this is not just an objective of hard Brexiteers. This is a wider question, and it needs to be dealt with in a wider way.
I understand that, but would you vote against important motions of your own government in order to soften the Brexit? You voted for Article 50, for example.
I did, because
there'll be equivalent votes. There'll be loads of legislation, great repeal bills and such like, to get us out of the EU. Would you use your parliamentary muscle, and you'd have more of it if you were in Westminster now, because there's a very small majority?
Yeah, I think that leverage that's now available to colleagues of mine and to the DUP and so on is obviously much higher than before. So yes, there is a potential here, but we're not talking about voting against the government, essentially.
Not confidence motions.
No, because what we are trying to do here is have a serious discussion about moving the agenda away from purely a hard Brexit towards something more reasonable.
Last one. You lost your seat on Thursday. It was a Remainer seat. I think it was a sort of... It's considered a seat that was Remainer. Do you think Theresa May's Brexit lost you that vote?
I think that I lost the vote for a number of reasons. One of them was the manifesto. One of them was actually holding the general election at all. And one of them was indeed Brexit, because I think that the public generally were looking at the situation and painting us as basically obsessed with Brexit, obsessed with a hard Brexit. And a lot of people in my constituency certainly didn't want that. So they were not willing to attach their vote to my party and therefore to give it to me. And I think that was a real difficulty during the general election for a lot of my colleagues.
Neil Carmichael, Daniel Hannan, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
So there was another election this week in France with Emmanuel Macron now comfortably ensconced as president there. His new political party is fighting elections for the National Assembly, and in the first round of two, they did well. It's evidence, by the way, that traction matters in politics. Macron's success in one election seems to have bolstered his performance in the next. In fact, his La République En Marche party is set to get 3/4 of the seats in the Assembly, the kind of majority it once looked as though Theresa May might get. It's been an extraordinary year in France for reasons very different to those preoccupying us here. He only became president last month, the youngest leader in the G7. His party didn't even exist 18 months ago. But here's the astonishing map of the leaders in each area in yesterday's election. Macron's party is in orange. And in blue, Macron's nemesis, the Front National. It had the reverse experience, finding that failure begets more failure. 13% of the vote yesterday. And most striking, the Socialist Party in pink here. It's collapsed. In Macron's favour is a perception he's been doing quite well. He's had the firmest grip on how to deal with Donald Trump. He's also the man who's spoken gay rights to Putin in public. For now, Macron is the man with momentum, and he's using it to try and rebuild the French alliance with Germany, the one that allowed France to dominate the EU for all those years until Britain got in the way. Now, let's not exaggerate. Macron's liberal globalism is not to everyone's taste in France at all. The turnout was very low yesterday, and this is just the first round of two. But what does Macron's dominance of French politics tell us about Brexit and the UK? I'm joined by Gideon Rachman of the Financial Times and Pauline Bock of the New Statesman. Pauline, why is the guy doing so well, do you think?
Well, he has done a very good campaign, and to be fair, it's not that much that he's done so well that the others have done quite terribly. He's defeated Marine Le Pen, who was seen as his biggest opponent during the campaign. The Socialists are in total disarray. They were the ones in government with François Hollande. He won a majority in the parliament as well in 2012, and now they won only 7% of
They're going to lose
vote.
200 seats. It's the sort of thing in a parliamentary election you think is just cannot happen.
It can, apparently, and it does, and the others are not doing so well either. On the left as well, Mélenchon's France Insoumise.
And is that just because the left are split between Mélenchon and the other side?
It partly is. To be fair, so Benoît Hamon was the candidate of the Socialists during the election, and Mélenchon was the hard-left candidate, and they never reached an accord. They said they would. They tried several times. It did not work. If you add up their percentages, you actually could have.
You could have probably had one in the second round. Yeah,
you could have.
Gideon, the Financial Times obviously likes Macron. It's their sort of person. Do you regret we don't have one here?
Well, it's certainly pretty remarkable for the whole kind of British self-image. We've seen France as in sort of terrible political disarray and Britain as pretty solid and centrist for many years, and now it's completely flipped. They have a kind of Blairite as their president, sweeping all before him, a bit like Blair did in 1997, and our politics is spinning off to the far left and to the Brexiteer right.
Right, let's talk about Europe, because, Gideon, the Macron vision is incredibly pro-European, and one actually wonders whether even the French will stomach his kind of integrationist view of the world.
Sure. I mean, there's a long tradition of French Euroscepticism as well, but Macron put his colours to the mast. On the night he was elected, he marched out onto the stage to the European anthem, not to the French anthem. He is an integrationist, very strongly so, and I think he feels that he has the momentum behind him now. But it's, unfortunately for Britain, quite important for him to demonstrate that leaving the EU, which is actually what Marine Le Pen seemed to be flirting with, and indeed Mélenchon, is a really bad idea. So there's no way, I think, he's going to make it easy for Britain. You were talking earlier about, well, maybe we could move towards a soft Brexit, and I think Theresa May would love him to make a gesture tomorrow when they meet, perhaps on free movement or maybe on money, but I don't think he's going to give her anything, because it's important for domestic political purposes and for his vision of Europe that Brexit failed.
Do you think this... We always used to think of the French-German alliance as the motor of the European Union. That was before we had the 10 East European countries coming in and shifting the whole gravity to the away from the West. Do you think he can sell? Do you think he can, rebuild that and kind of sell it to the French people, Pauline?
Yes, I think he can. I think he's already doing that. He, as you said, he marched to the
What did they think of that? Did they like that?
I mean, they did. They made fun of it a bit because that's what you do in France. But I think they did because there has been some Euroscepticism in France. But we have the euro. We have the borders. I come from the country of three borders, which is Luxembourg, France, and Germany. So it doesn't work the same way. It's not just Britain on its island, and because of that, he can work with that, and he's already doing that. During his campaign, he met with Angela Merkel in Berlin, the person from his team who made this meeting possible, Sylvie Goulard, is now Minister of Defense. She is fluent in German. His Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, is also fluent in German. He's definitely sending messages to Germany.
So, Gideon, just fill us in then on this argument that this is bad for Brexit. Why? Because one of the arguments going around was Macron's won, the Front National have been defeated. They don't have to worry about populism on the continent anymore, so they don't need to punish Britain and make Britain look stupid for leaving the EU. They can be more relaxed. And you're kind of arguing the opposite of that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think if Macron takes a long-term view, he can't assume that all those Eurosceptic forces are dead forever. He has to prove that Brexit's a bad idea. But equally, I think if he wants to push for a more integrationist Europe, you know, traditionally Britain's been a brake on that. It's been a bore if you're a European integrationist. So the Brits are out, makes it much easier to go to Berlin and say, OK, let's get that old Franco-German partnership working together again and go for it. Now, I think there are questions about whether in the long run the Germans really will make the moves that Macron wants, particularly on this transfer union, transferring money around the EU. I think they are still pretty hesitant about that. But it's probably his best chance is now to get it done.
We'll leave it there. Thanks both very much. Thank you. 4 theories as to why the Tories slipped back in the election last Thursday. 1, youthquake. Corbyn engaged the young. 2, Remainer revenge. Pro-EU voters turned away from the hard Brexit Tories. 3, the populist uprising continues. Disgruntled voters saw Corbyn as the change candidate this time and turned to him. And 4, Wooden Theresa. The Prime Minister failed to come across as human, and voters tend to prefer humans, other things being equal. Well, you'll have your own theories, but Katie Razzle has been to Bolton to find out more, a town where the Tories once harboured hopes of winning a seat.
A strong and stable leadership, a strong and stable government, the strong and stable leadership this country needs.
It all started in Bolton North East. That mantra had its first outing in the church where Theresa May launched her campaign. It was a clear statement that she would take her fight deep into Labour seats, deep into enemy territory.
That was 7 long weeks ago, and back then the expectation was they'd win big, taking seats off Labour like this one. But on Thursday, that just didn't happen. So what went wrong?
3, 2, 1, and... It's Marathon Day in Bolton North East. This was just one of the Labour seats that failed to turn blue in the landslide that never happened. None of the forecasts were as bleak as this. It was hard to find Bolton voters who'd been impressed.
It was a disaster from start to finish. From starting off in Bolton and in Bolton North East, the Labour majority for the past 20 years, I think it summed up that kind of like a perfect metaphor for her campaign. It was completely misguided. It was completely based on some sort of wild fantasy she had in her head.
Senior Tories in Bolton told us the fiasco over social care really hurt their campaign. But for these runners getting ready out of the rain, there were other factors at play too.
I was going to do Conservative, like I have done before, but then after sitting down with my children and they looked online and they did a poll and they did some other things, they both decided that they both wanted to do Labour, and I thought, well, it's the children's future now, so I'll put my vote for them.
One of the stories of the campaign was the youth vote from school age up. We don't know how many influenced their parents, but we do know here they voted in high numbers.
Do you feel that you were very instrumental in what's happened in this election?
Definitely. I feel like we've caused it because we've gone from having such a small turnout amongst 18 to 24-year-olds to having a massive one.
Emily, Charlie, Dylan and Jude are 18 and at Turton High School. All of them voted Labour and encouraged others to do the same.
Social media had a massive impact. I feel like a lot of posts and stuff made on Facebook, a lot of them were quite comedic, which I feel like it kind of resonated with the youth to kind of, it put it on a personal level that they could kind of interact with it.
I think we just wanted to show the rest of the country that we do know what we're talking about. We are interested. We're not just going to sit back and let you, who have had your years to do what you like with the country, we're not going to let you take over anymore.
Because they don't think that young people are going to turn out and vote. And I think by encouraging people to go and cast a vote, I think you're challenging that and showing people that young people aren't just this sort of apathetic silent body that are just going to sit by.
There's this kind of, oh, they'll never turn out. There's no point even appealing to them because they never turn out. And this shows that we do, if you actually offer us some
expected UKIP voters in places like this to move to them. But instead, Tory councillor John Walsh saw a late surge of young Labour voters at his polling station. Then he knew his party wouldn't win. Their own UKIP surge never materialised.
Many of those who voted UKIP were the salt of the earth, working class, hard-working Bolton families. They were not natural Conservatives, they were in large numbers Labour supporters who heard an attractive message from Jeremy Corbyn.
So Corbyn outplayed the Conservatives?
In that sense, yes, his campaign outplayed, and I give credit to him.
Is this the worst Conservative campaign you've seen?
I've got to say it probably was. And it probably was because it was too long, because it went off in too many different directions, and we didn't have a focus throughout the campaign as strongly as we ought to have had.
It's gin fizz night at the last drop in. As the gin and champagne flowed, an explanation perhaps of why the Tory wooing of UKIP voters didn't pay off, from one Nigel Farage fan.
I voted for him last time, and I voted for him in Brexit. Because he's not available, I went back to Labour.
Because the Conservatives thought that people like you might go from UKIP to them.
But I didn't believe what she said. I had no confidence in her.
Amongst voters here, Tory and non, nobody had a good word to say about the May campaign.
And all she had to do in this election, based on the lead that she had, is just not be completely rubbish. And that's what she was.
Do you think she can survive?
No, but I think what they'll do is they'll probably form a coalition if they can, and in maybe 3 to 4 months she'll be gone.
The government misjudged the mood music during this campaign. 2 months ago, they hoped a landslide would deliver them this seat and others like it. That strategy cost the Prime Minister dear. Voters in Bolton, at least, now see turmoil and confusion when what they want is clarity.
Katie Razzle there in Bolton. Well, one of the central explanations for Labour's strong performance last week, my theory number one, was youthquake, the way in which Labour and Mr Corbyn engaged younger voters and persuaded them to turn out in higher numbers. We've got 3 people who fit that description, so we can delve deeper into why this happened and whether it's a permanent feature of our politics. Abby Wilkinson is the professional commentator here. She writes for The Guardian, amongst others. But with her is Eve Ray. She's 18 and from Brighton. And Thorin Govind, who is 24 and does come from Bolton, where Katie's film was made. And you all supported Labour last week. Thorin, why did you vote? Because you'd been a Tory voter before, hadn't you?
Yes, I voted Tory in the last election, but unfortunately the Tories haven't been considering the front line. You know, every day in my line of work I'm seeing vulnerable patients, I'm helping deliver their medication, provide...
You're a pharmacist profession,
yeah, medication reuse reviews. We're helping patients, but the government's not helping patients, and this was a real vote NHS election for me.
So it's about austerity, about public services.
About the NHS.
Eve, now you're 18, so you haven't voted before. We can't say you used to be a Tory.
Nope.
Why did you go for Jeremy Corbyn?
He gave me hope, personally, compared to any other party that campaigned and tried to get my vote. It was definitely Jeremy Corbyn that targeted the youth, targeted people like me, and said, this could be your country as well.
Have you always been quite political or not been political at all? Or
I started around when I was about 15. My mum's always kept me in the loop, but it was definitely Brexit that got me in to all the politics.
So Brexit engaged you, and you were a Remain supporter
Yes.
at the time, right? Abby, what about you? I mean, you're Labour. We can't say you're sort of convert or anything like that.
Not at all. The country's not working for everyone, and it hasn't been for a while. Like these girls are saying, we need properly funded public services. We need opportunities. I think that the hope thing, that's really it for me. It's this idea that the world actually can get better, the country can get better, our future can be better than the past. Because at the moment, it feels like we're in this state of decline, like employment rights are getting eroded, housing is getting more and more unaffordable. I just think Labour offered the chance of something better.
Can I ask whether you can think of something in the in the Corbyn campaign that really grabbed you? A moment, a line, a speech? Is there something?
It was the manifesto, the promise to halt cuts to community pharmacy. I mean, at the moment, it's a 20-minute walk for most people to their community pharmacy. With what the Conservatives have implemented, it's going to be much further, and it's the hope that they're giving me.
And did you believe I'm not asking this in a negative way. Did you believe everything in the manifesto, that, like, the guy will deliver all of this? Or did you think, it's kind of, because he's quite a lot of spending in there, wasn't there? And it was...
I don't trust any manifesto, but I have to believe that on these key issues like the NHS, the Labour Party have shown that they understand these issues.
Come on, Eve. What was the moment in the campaign? The line used, the speech you saw and were inspired by?
Obviously, for most people, it's the "for the many, not the few." That's hit me quite hard, and I like how he's trying in the manifesto to try and make spendings fairer and the tax evasion. He's trying to get corporate tax. He's trying to make people earning over 80,000 pay their fair tax.
And he's a little bit equivocal about the EU, isn't he? He wasn't the feistiest campaigner for the Remain side, but that didn't put you off him?
No, it didn't, personally, because it wasn't as if David Cameron tried his very best.
Abby, what moment in the campaign? Because often I just wondered what actually people were clutching.
It was the manifesto launch when I thought, ooh, we could actually do it. Because, you know, I've always thought that a Labour government is better for the country. I've always thought that left of the Labour Party had the solutions. I think post-economic crash, we would need quite a radical shake-up. But the manifesto came out, it had things for a lot of people, and I thought, you know, people are going to like this.
So just to be clear, because sometimes people say the Corbyn thing, you know, JC, the same initials as Jesus Christ, it's a bit of a cult of personality. You've all given policy things rather than Corbyn things. Or is it a Corbyn thing?
I think there's this funny thing. You know, he has got a fan club. There are young people on social media, like Jeremy Corbyn, the absolute boy. He's a great guy, but actually undercutting that is a real sense that things need to change and that, you know, it's possible to change things. And he's sort of a figurehead. It's not just about him. It's like this is a movement of people who have bold ideas and believe it's possible for things to get better and necessary.
Eve, a lot of people have also said, trying to some extent dismiss the durability of the kind of movement that has emerged, I suppose, last week, is it's all about student fees, and whoever throws the biggest bribe of the largest number of people wins the election. And now, I think you're going to say, no, it's not about student fees, but was it about student fees?
Well, for me, my vote isn't about student fees.
Right.
However, because I decided early on that I was going to vote Labour, but then he came out with the student fees and it just kind of sold it for me.
Right.
Loads of people...
And you believed it? You believed they would get rid of student fees? I'm not saying they wouldn't, I'm just saying you felt that was credible. Other people have said it and have not delivered it. And
I was hesitant to believe that it would happen in 2017, that early on, maybe 2018, but I believed him when he said that he would scrap them eventually.
OK, now the other interesting aspect of this is where, this sounds like ghastly sort of middle-aged man peering into the lives of younger people, I hate this kind of thing, but is where you get your media from, where you get your news from. I mean, what do you do? Is it all social media? Are you reading newspapers? What kind of stuff are you getting on social media?
I mean, I'm an avid tweeter all the time, mainly about pharmacy, but also about politics. And I think my Twitter feed's changed recently. I was following a lot of pro-Tory feeds, and suddenly it's become all about Labour. And I think there's nothing beats a Sunday morning with a newspaper. Maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned like that.
Right. Eve, what do you do?
No newspapers for me. I don't read those kind of things. I'm very much a social media person. The Canary.
Which social media are you getting news from?
I get a lot of social media news from Twitter. Personally, I don't trust Facebook. It's more of an old person's kind of...
But when you say from Twitter, what do you mean? Is it clips from Newsnight, or is it clips from wild, unsourced allegations made by somebody 5 steps removed?
It's facts a lot. of the time. It's stating facts, it's when it's got links behind it, it's got evidence behind it.
And you read it carefully, do you? Sort of,
yeah,
you don't just accept it.
I don't want a fact without evidence. So.
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting things about this election is how much money the Conservatives spent on social media and how the Labour Party managed to reach far more people with a fraction of the spending just because young people and older people were so enthusiastic about what they're offering. They were sharing it organically and showing their friends. I think Momentum spent £2,000 on its Facebook ads, and they reached 12.7 million people in their last week in Facebook ads. The Tories spent £1 million on Facebook and did not have the same reach.
OK, last and really important question. Is this going to come the next election? Do you think you and your peers will behave in the same way as you did in this one, or do you think you'll revert to the type, the stereotype of not going out, perhaps not being quite as engaged? Do you think you'll stick with it, Eve?
I think Corbyn has created such a wave.
Even if he's not there?
It depends who replaces him, but Corbyn himself has created a wave. If he
Will you go
sticks.
back to the Tories, Thorin?
I think I'm going to have to consider the manifestos and what they actually deliver. I mean, we could still have another election yet.
But you don't like paying high taxes.
I don't like paying high taxes, but I don't want to see people suffer, and I don't want to return to the nasty party.
Thank you all very much. Thanks, sorry, Abby. Thanks. Now, in a story that was seemingly designed for the great pun machine that is Twitter, we learned today that there will be no goats harmed in the writing of the Queen's speech. The parchment on which it is written is called goatskin parchment, but it turns out that it is, in fact, not made of the skin of goats. So whenever the speech takes place, there were at least some celebrations ringing out across the country today. I'm not kidding. Very good night.
Well, we want to be free. We want to be free to do what we want to do. And we want to have a good time. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a party.
Hello there. For many this week, a northwest, south